Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this session by Dr. Kazuo Amma from Tokyo University. Professor Amma is a professor of general linguistics and English language teacher training program at Tokyo University, Japan, and is also the former president of the Japan-Britain Association of English Teaching. Today, he will be presenting a session called Willingness to Participate and How to Overcome the Difficulties. Dr. Amma, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you. Let me share my slides. Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming to my session. I'm Amma Kazuo from Tokyo University. Today, I'm going to talk about how task unfamiliarity affects test performance. First, I review related background.
Sorry, Dr. Amma, I don't think we have seen the slide yet.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to share the slide. Sorry. Just a moment. Okay. Right. Now it looks okay.
Yes, thank you.
Right. Sorry. In spite of my test just 10 minutes ago, I failed to show you my slide. Okay, from the beginning. I'm Amma Kazuo from Tokyo University, and I'm going to talk about test unfamiliarity affects. Task unfamiliarity affects test performance. Right. This is the overview. First, I review related background literature very briefly. The main part is to show you what happened among the Japanese junior and senior high school students taking 2 proficiency tests conducted by the Japanese Ministry of Education, or MEXT, focusing on their null performance or avoidance. L2 acquisition models expect the learners to develop the willingness to participate in the language tasks and ability to cope with unexpected situations. This disposition and implicit quality should grow together with the learner's proficiency in the target language complexity and in the expansion of the content domain, given an ample amount of learning opportunities. While formal linguistic knowledge can be taught and knowledge of the content topics can be acquired through intensive classroom teaching, skills of dealing with actual situations need repeated practices. McIntyre, Dornier, Clement, and Noels point out that novel situations should be particularly detrimental to WTC. They present a classical model of how willingness to communicate is incorporated in a language production. It includes such quality as competence, motivation, and self-confidence. In short, willingness to communicate is a gateway through which the learner's performance is filtered. What I have recently observed in the nationwide examinations conducted by the Ministry of Education indicates that lack of enough learning opportunities might lead to a disservice in the local ELT context. At the same time, however, we have hope for the future if we raise children who wish to actively participate in the learning activities and exert efforts to overcome difficulties. Our general knowledge in language testing tells us that the performance distribution becomes positively skewed when the average task difficulty rises above the average learner ability. However, a series of MEXT tests for junior high school students exhibited a huge lump of participants around 0 points, including no responses. This phenomenon cannot be explained simply by the relationship between test difficulty and learner ability. Here is the result of MEXT survey for English proficiency in 2015 and 2016. The writing section constantly produced 10 to 15% of no answer or abandonment. This phenomenon has continued for several years until now. What prevented the zero scorers from coping with the task is assumed to be test unfamiliarity. The test was conducted in June to July, but the corresponding task in the textbooks was typically introduced in December to January, some 6 months later. Although similar composition practices had been taught before, writing a structured short essay with an introduction, development, and conclusion with appropriate connective terms was a new challenge to most of the learners when the MEXT test was given. The writing section was composed of 2 questions. One, to fill a blank with a sentence appropriate for the context. And 2, write a short essay explaining an activity and the reason. A sample question asks, what will you do if you have a whole free day? Name one and write the reason for your choice. A model answer might go like, I would like to go shopping for pens and notebooks with my friends. One reason is, another reason is, that's why I like to go shopping, and so on. A subsequent MEXT report analyzes the results. Whereas nearly 99% of the upper half students in writing passed the criteria of stating an opinion and reason in question 2, only about 45% of the lower half students failed to do so. In other words, they found it hard to express their own ideas in their own language. Besides, the targeted goal of short essay writing itself might be unrealistic. According to my personal interview with some junior high school teachers, they find it hard to spare time teaching free composition based on the learner's own ideation. They can barely digest passive tasks of grammar-oriented exercises. It suggests that junior high school students have insufficient opportunities of writing meaningful sentences that is meaningful to them. It explains why they ended up with 0 scores or no response, even to the more controlled tasks in question 1. Here, the task was to compose sentences suitable for the context. This is a short dialogue between you and Mary on shopping. You say, that's a nice t-shirt. Mary says, you should try it on. And you say something. And Mary says, then you should try a larger size. A model, sample model answer would be, it's too small. As simple as that. Almost all the lower half students and even half of the upper half students got 0 points for the first question. It might have been perceived as beyond the ability of the students who had usually practiced passive applications of grammar and vocabulary rules. Since the topics were daily issues, such as what to do on the weekends or where to go on holidays in both questions, it is not considered a matter of topic familiarity, but task familiarity. Here is the distribution of scores of public school students in 2015. The same set of tests was also conducted to students of national junior high schools. Although the participants were only 1% of the entire population, it indicates quite a distinct score distribution. In contrast with the public school students with a large cluster of low scores, only 0.9% of national school students had 0 points here. Although the entire distribution is negatively skewed, there's no strange irregularity around the null score. There's no literature about what is taught and how it is taught at national junior high schools, but judging from the strong seeding effect in reading and listening sections, we can assume that there are more learning practices in writing as well. It will make the free writing task familiar, and they won't feel any stress coping with it. Another MEXT test, survey for guideline implementation for some 5,000 senior high school students conducted in 2015, revealed a stronger clustering of bottom lump. Regrettably, I cannot disclose the distribution of total scores as it is restricted. However, the actual distribution looks quite like the simulated line on the left, created by amalgamating two normal distributions with different parameters. It is similar to the distribution of the previous test in 2005 on the right, with the bottom peak enhanced. The twin peak distribution of total scores is clearly suggestive of two distinct groups of proficiency. In fact, a principal component analysis indicated that the participants were a mixture of two qualitatively different groups. This test was aimed at confirming the achievement of the goals specified by MEXT's guideline for instruction, with a particular and new emphasis on the ability to think and evaluate critically and to express thoughts spontaneously. These goals were included in the guideline as they were considered weak among Japanese learners of English, as well as textbooks and classroom teaching. One example task for such a goal was to write a possible solution in one sentence for the problem of the relationship between the use of electricity and CO2 emission. Not many students managed to do so. Some typical incorrect answers were, we could protect the environment, we have to stop global warming, or we should stop using a car. The pass rate of this question was 35%. The question we focus on here was a guided writing task. The students were asked to write a short suggestion in 4 sentences or more, given a request from a friend for some advice. 74% here in the dark area, 74% of the entire students scored 0 points. They correspond with the bottom peak of the total score distribution. That is, only a small portion of top students managed to clear this task. Of these null scorers, 24% abandoned the task. A factor analysis revealed 2 major factors. Factor 1, representing passive or static knowledge, corresponding to traditional test types of summarizing and discourse comprehension, and factor 2, representing logical inferencing and integration, reflecting the new guideline goals of thinking and evaluating critically and expressing ideas spontaneously. The guided writing task, which I shall discuss shortly, is one of the major representatives of this factor 2. Interesting enough is the twin peak distribution of factor scores of factor 1 on the left, not factor 2 on the right. One possible interpretation is that the performance of factor 1 ability was distorted under the pressure of applying existing knowledge to new contexts, resulting in 2 directions: successful application, here this group, and dwarfed retreat. In contrast, Factor 2 involves performance of innovative abilities, which was unfamiliar to students of all proficiency levels. That was why the distribution had a single peak, although the peak score was low and the distribution was slightly positively skewed. Further, common to the two MEXT tests was the poor performance of expressing one's own view based on his or her analysis and the evaluation of the data or context. A questionnaire survey conducted together with the guideline implementation test reveals a relationship between the students' learning practices and the performance in the guided writing task. For the question of whether they practice writing their ideas in English or summarize new knowledge after reading and listening, the students who replied positively had a pass rate of 36% and an abandon rate of 14%. But those who replied negatively had a pass rate of 20% and an abandon rate of 29%. As for the comparison of factor 1 and factor 2, factor 2 was more related to the questionnaire items, which involved active participation in learning than factor 1. There were 6 such items affecting the factor 2 scores, but only 2 items for factor 1. The students who performed better in factor 2 tried to capture the points while reading texts, write down their own ideas and opinions, not necessarily in English, like to write their messages in English and read English newspapers and magazines. Furthermore, those who pass the guided writing task are more involved in such behavior or belief as summarizing the points after reading texts, seeking a variety of ideas, writing down their own ideas with evidence, being in favor of writing their messages in English, being in favor of studying the contents in English, and wishing to contribute to the country or the world. No such active participation was observed among the students who abandoned the writing task. They are described with these features. For instance, the fewer the study hours, the more likely they abandon. This is the summary. Abandonment or null performance is a result of inexperience or task unfamiliarity, and it is likely to occur when the task is perceived as beyond one's ability. And learners need to get the ability to cope with the challenge, which derives from willingness to participate. And this willingness to participate is not sufficiently promoted in the Japanese EFL context. We can conclude then that the students who are willing to participate in language learning activities are capable of coping with the cognitively challenging tasks of critical thinking and evaluation and spontaneous expression of one's own ideas. In other words, in order to achieve these goals of MEXT guideline, the students' willingness to participate must be encouraged, and the opportunities to promote it must be guaranteed. Referring back to the MEXT test for guideline implementation, there was also a questionnaire for schools and teachers as to how much the new goals were implemented. One of the questions was, do you introduce activities in favor of raising critical thinking and evaluation and spontaneous expression in your class? Nearly 20% of senior high school teachers were negative, which was 3 times the number of primary school teachers. Another question asked which goal of the MEXT guideline had not yet been achieved in the institution. The top 3 were to promote spontaneous and self-disciplined learning, to provide opportunities of problem solving and to encourage critical thinking and evaluation and spontaneous expression. These results indicate that both the teachers and schools are not quite ready to respond to the new MEXT guideline requirements, resulting in the lack of conversion from declarative knowledge to procedural knowledge and perceived increase in difficulty of unfamiliar tasks on the student's part. Christopher Kendering once remarked that in order to develop communication strategies, the learners have to go through the opportunities of problem solving. By overcoming problems and challenges repeatedly, students can activate their declarative knowledge and apply it to unfamiliar situations with some confidence. For future orientation, increasing the frequency and length of learning could be one possible solution, but the fundamental issue would be to consider what English language learning is for. If we stay in the stage of passive knowledge without stimulating our learners' active participation, the whole educational enterprise will be good for nothing. And here's a short list of references. So let's put an end to doing nothing. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for a fascinating presentation, Professor Amma. I have one question here from Barry O'Sullivan. It appears from these data that the English language proficiency of learners in the Japanese system is critically low in terms of language usage and communicative potential. Do you see a way out of this?
You mean the solution?
Yes.
Well, that's a big question, and a lot of teachers and researchers have thought about it for a long time, and there's no way out. One thing is is related to the context of English language use in Japan, where English is just a foreign language, and there's no need among people in general to use English, even for promotion or getting a job hunting or whatever. English is just one of the school subjects for students to go through, and that the lack of big needs would be one cause of the problem. And the situation is moving, as Professor Yoshida mentioned yesterday, that both the curriculum and some teachers are starting to change the situation, but the change is taking place very slowly.
Also, you mentioned earlier that you feel that the low writing scores, at least in part, can be attributed to a willingness to participate. But I remember seeing that the speaking scores were actually quite a bit higher. Speaking, of course, also being a skill often, based on participation. Yeah. How can you explain this difference?
Well, I avoided to mention speaking. Speaking section had a lot of problems. The scoring system is very, very lenient. If students say something, they will get a high score. That's my answer your first question. The expected standards is very low for particularly for speaking.
I have one other question here. As you said, the teachers and schools are not ready for the MEXT new guideline. What solution would you recommend the MEXT to do?
Well, it's not my job to do so. But well, MEXT is has a role of giving directions on top-down basis, and but what they could also do is to influence teachers as well as parents and general folks on the street to have the to raise the needs and awareness of learning foreign languages.
Okay, I've got one question, maybe slightly beyond the scope of this presentation, but Japan has a very quite a long history of English conversation schools, like the Eikaiwa and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think these have had any positive effect at all on students' willingness to participate?
Yes, I think so. Speaking helps willingness to participate very much. So the problem of unwillingness to participate in writing, well, much of that problem could be solved by promoting speaking practices. And not only conversation schools, but school systems have a lot to do to improve the situation.
I see, which ties into a next question here. If the students have more test preparation materials before the test, would that help to improve a student's willingness to participate in writing? And if so, is that a teacher's job?
Well, if, as I said, if students are used to a variety of tasks, they are expected to have more adaptability for various kinds of tasks, including unfamiliar tasks. So just a simple amount of practice, I think it's one of the basic solutions. And teachers' role is to provide as many opportunities as possible for the students to activate the new knowledge wherever it is possible. Although the entire time is limited. So what teachers can do in the classroom may not affect the entire picture, but if they stimulate the learners so that the learners will manage their learning by themselves, that will be a big move.
And the final question here, do teachers in Japan have enough materials to do that?
Sorry,
do teachers in Japan have enough materials to do that? To provide a mix of tasks to sufficiently prepare students?
Yes and no. school teachers, junior and senior high school teachers use teachers' books, which contains a variety of activities, suggested activities, but not many of them are actually carried out in the classroom, mostly because of the shortage of time in the classroom. Well, it depends on the individual teachers. Some teachers focus more on productive activities, but traditionally, teachers are more concerned with formal practices for grammar and vocabulary. So it depends on what is important in English language learning.
All right, we have reached the end of our session. Thank you ever so much, Professor Amma.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about this topic.
Yep, that was very enlightening. Okay, that's the end of our session. Thank you everyone for joining, and feel free to continue discussing it in the communal hub. Bye everyone.
Thank you.